Greetings, Flyers fans, and welcome back to the Flyers Face Off podcast, the show where we discuss Flyers hockey and nothing but Flyers hockey, so help us God. I am your lovable host, Kevin Fortier. You can follow me on Twitter at KSFortier and follow the show at Flyers Face Off. All right, guys, it's finally hockey season, so let's get started. First, I am very happy to have back two friends of the show returning for the first show of the 2019-2020 season. I have Jamey Baskow and Yariv Wolok, who are both from PhillySportsNetwork.com. Hey, Yariv, tell the folks where they can follow your work.
Sure. Thanks. Welcome back, or thank you for having me back. And you can find me on Twitter. I'm Y Wolok, YWOLOK, on pretty much all social media, but for sure Twitter. That's where I do most of my hockey talk. I'll throw some stuff on Instagram every now and then as well. And I also do videos for Philly Sports Network that are on YouTube, on our official YouTube page. I do the Flyers narrative portion where I kind of do different breakdowns of stuff from games to just my feedback on sections of the season or prospects or players, individual players and whatnot. So go check that out. And yeah, I'll be doing more writings during the season as well.
Great. Jamey, your turn.
Pretty much what Yariv said. You can follow us at PhillySportsNetwork.com. All our articles and whatnot are on there. Or you can follow me on Twitter. My handle is Jamey at Jamey Baskow, and that's where you find everything. Kevin, thanks for having me on again. It's a pleasure and an honor to come on for your guest, and I appreciate all their support.
And actually, it's my pleasure to have both you guys back on the show. You guys have been early friends and longtime friends of the show, so it's much appreciated. A little bit earlier this evening, I happened to go out to the Philly.com website and noticed that the Flyers made two moves today, sending both of the guys that I was actually excited about seeing, Phil Myers and Joel Farabee, down to the Phantoms. Now, it seems like this is primarily a cap move because they were, when you factored in penalties and everything, they were actually about, I think it was 1.3, 1.4 million over the cap. So now they only have 11 forwards and 7D on the roster right now. Stewart is still around, unfortunately, and they've got about 238K of cap space. So let's start here. Obviously, this does not make me very happy. I've been looking forward to all summer seeing Phil Myers on the back end, getting picking up where he left off, getting a chance to really show what he can do and begin his professional career at start off the season as a Flyer full time. And Farabee was probably one of, if not the most exciting Flyer, and especially young Flyer, in the preseason. So hopefully, if this is just a cap move, and once they get a couple of the injured guys, Patrick Pitlick, Walensky potentially, on some sort of injured status, that they'll have some space, be able to bring both of those guys back up. At least Farabee, right? Because you got to have 12 forwards anyway. They're probably not super quick to just carry 8D and have, certainly not have Myers just sitting in the press box. They'll probably rather have him playing down at the Phantoms. But anyway, let's just go ahead and then kick this around a little bit. Yariv, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think you kind of nailed it there. I think most of this is obviously cap related. Ultimately, I think they would want to keep both players with the team, and I think Vigneault even said that himself, that even the statement he said about Farabee, that he couldn't anticipate Farabee not being there. And I don't think that last game, which was a horrendous game, is one that kind of excluded Farabee from the conversation of being with this team. I think simply right now, if you look at cap friendly, I don't actually see a scenario where Farabee's contract can be carried unless you drop a veteran. Bunneman and Twarynski both make under 800,000. Morin makes 700,000, and he's not waiver exempt. So, and we have about 200,000 right now available in cap space. I think slightly over 283. So, if you do that math, you could maybe get Farabee and not one of the others. They went with 11 forwards. They literally went with as minimal players as they can bring along with them into the season. This is unfortunately the situation we have with those buyouts that we and the cap that we retained. But ultimately, if you look at the game of both of them, Phil Myers, I didn't see the consistency. It was the same issue a little bit last year. I don't think it's necessarily a reflection of how he's going to play during the season. Did seem to me like he was trying a little bit too much at times, and I think that's probably what hurt him. A big part of this is knowing your role coming into the season. I actually talked to Carson Twarensky. He was one of my honorable mentions to make the team this year, and really the reason I did that is because when I asked him how he saw himself in the NHL, he told me exactly where I saw him. He said he saw himself as a checker, somebody who played physical. He was physically ready. Again, he kind of knew his role. And while Myers is an offensive defenseman, he cannot start playing that way immediately in the NHL. And I think that's kind of where he hit his wall. Farabee, I think, is just a numbers game, and I suspect he'll probably be up pretty soon. And, I suspect Myers too, but again, kind of a numbers game there too. If he does come up, it's not guaranteed he's going to play, and he's better off being the number one defenseman on the Phantoms rather than, being a seventh defenseman, eighth defenseman on a regular basis in the NHL. You get dangerous in that place. But I think you'll see a lot of changes as the season goes on, and the lack of cap flexibility pretty much led to these two youngest, or at least most flexible contracts to get devoted.
It certainly seemed that Myers, the last two games, kind of bounced back a little bit. He started strong. I mean, he looked phenomenal in the rookie game and in I would say the first two preseason games. And I mean, the thing it's a little bit of a struggle because when he was pinching in, he was skating up, going around the net, deking around guys, getting shots on net. It seemed like his confidence was high. He was playing well. He was also able to get back. He wasn't really getting beat defensively, and then he kind of stopped doing that. It seemed like his confidence was rattled a little bit, and then it's when he started making some defensive lapses. So it's kind of a catch-22. So, Jamey, how do you look at things?
To pretty much the same as your reef, but I'm going to touch on a few other things. It seems to be that Phil Myers is a slow starter. Like your reef said, the same thing happened with Phil Myers last preseason. He got off to a horrendous preseason. Went down to the Phantoms and shined, within the first few weeks, for the Phantoms. And from then, I mean, history was made. I mean, the kid knows how to play. This was strictly a cap move. He's waiver exempt. There were three waiver exempt players for the Flyers this season. It was Nolan Patrick, Carter Hart, and Phil Myers. Of course, Carter Hart wasn't going to get sent down. Phil Myers happened to be the cap casualty because they have, they're stocked defensively. Now they're, as seven defensemen, so they were afforded to send Phil Myers down without going through waivers, as Samuel Morin and Robert Hagg more than likely probably wouldn't have cleared because they're both very young. There's still some upside to both players. You don't know what you're getting in Samuel Morin. So, teams would be inclined to, select him off of waivers. Whereas, Robert Hagg, teams pretty much know what you're getting. You're getting a bottom six defenseman who can hit and block some shots. A player that every team more than likely needs. Unfortunately, the Flyers have a ton of those defensemen right now. But so they're stocked defensively. Forwards, Nolan Patrick can be placed on LTIR tomorrow, or Thursday for that matter, or even as early as Friday. If he is indeed placed on LTIR, he would have to sit out for 24 calendar days and 10 NHL games. That would afford the Flyers some cap flexibility, and they would be able to bring up, Joel Farabee. He is still over there in Prague with the team for a reason, and I think that's because they have 11 forwards, 7D, and two goalies sitting at 20. But it's kind of ironic. Chuck Fletcher knew that this was going to happen because last week on a conference call, he stated, "Don't be surprised if there's 20 to 21 players on a roster, for opening night." So he knew already about the cap, situation that he was going to be, given. So he knew. Also, he went on to say, there's going to be a lot of moving parts early in the season, and this is one of those moving parts. He had to send Joel Farabee and Phil Myers down. He knew. I think he knew in advance what he was going to do, but he let them play in the exhibition game to get one last look, just to make sure. although the Flyers played bad yesterday, against Switzerland, Farabee actually, his line with Lawton and Lindblom actually played very well in the third period. I think that was one of the better lines in the third period, aside from Coots, of course. But Farabee has the skill, and so does Felipe Myers. It's just the thing about Myers is that I don't think he got overconfident. I just think he gets off the slow starts. Whereas Robert Hagg, honestly outplayed him. That's what happened there. Now, Vigneault did say today he wants 8 defensemen. That's his ideal. Well, not once. His ideal is 8 defensemen. Felipe Myers at some point is going to receive a call up as well. But in this particular occasion for opening night, I think Joel Farabee will make the roster because Nolan Patrick will move to LTIR, freeing up cap space to bring up Joel Farabee. They wouldn't have enough to bring up both. You can only bring up one. Since the Flyers already have 7 defensemen for this trip, I think that Farabee would be the guy to make 12 forwards.
Even though he says 8D, it certainly doesn't make sense to have Myers sitting in the press box. It certainly makes sense to keep Morin with the club to, because he missed a year basically with his ACL. So I don't know that, it was funny. I was thinking before you said it, I don't know that Haig actually really outplayed Myers. Haig just he doesn't really do much of anything. He just kind of sits back and he'll bounce the puck up the boards. He doesn't really skate the puck up ice.
Myers, I think Myers, turned it on. He had some few good games there, and
Yariv, jump back in.
Sorry, I'm hearing you guys talk, and that's kind of the point I was trying to make earlier, right? You guys talk about why is Hag make the team because he is uninteresting. I know that sounds silly, but to a coach, in my opinion, I think they just want him to make those extremely simple plays. The thing with Robert Haig is that his game is very simple, and because that game is simple, he is more predictable, and he is going to make less mistakes and put himself in less compromising situations. He's not going to be able to pull off half of the things that Phil Myers can pull off. Overall, Phil Myers' ceiling is much higher, and that's kind of what I was referring to. Is if Phil Myers can simplify his game for his entry into the NHL, that's how he'll stick, and that's why he lost his spot. And not specifically he lost his spot because they were better, but because salary or cap situations, neither one of Morin or Haig or waiver exempt, so the option isn't there. And you're not going to lose them, and they're going to get grabbed. They are going to get grabbed. So what I would look for is as the season moves forward, somebody's going to have to go. Most likely, I don't know who from the D, but it will become a numbers game over time. Maybe injuries will change that, but I think eventually you're not going to be able to hold back Phil Myers. It's not really a question of skill. He just needs to stop making those errors. And once he does, then he'll make his way back up. And I'm sure we'll see that very shortly. He is also 22 years old, so pretty consistent pattern with kids.
Assuming Morin didn't blow up, didn't get injured, looked halfway decent, that I could anticipate the Flyers moving Haig because he does have value. He certainly had a decent season last year. He was tops of the league in hits and tops, close to the top for block shots from defensemen. So he's got value there, and then you can keep Morin around, see as he continues to develop, maybe he gets in some time with injuries, etc. See what he might have there, because you're probably not going to get a lot of return for Morin at this point in time. And it's just not going to make sense long term to carry 8 defensemen on the roster, and especially when they're so tight to the cap. Now that brings up another topic that I want to get into, but I want to kind of just do a little bit more of a recap of the preseason discussion before I get into more of the cap details. One of the things that stood out at me in the preseason games here again is that the Flyers just do not seem to be able to score goals. I posted it the other day. I think that, they had 1, 2, 2, 4, 3, and then maybe 2 or 1 and then 3 yesterday. And the 4-goal game that they had was against basically an all AHL Rangers team, and they put up 3 against the Swiss team yesterday, and one of them was scored when they had the goalie pulled. They still have trouble finding the back of the net. And a lot of the veterans they weren't really standing out in the games that they were playing in. And really across the board, and even Provorov up until about 10 minutes left in that game yesterday, he didn't really stand out very much, and especially in that game, yes, in the first half of that game yesterday, he was right back to making misplays, turning the puck over. His passes didn't look sharp. It was just really kind of surprising that I wasn't seeing guys really kind of step up and perform the way I was kind of expecting them to come out of the gate here. And I know it's preseason, but it was kind of disappointing the team just really not take some of those steps that you would hope. Now, granted, there is a new coach, they're learning a new system, etc. But you got some really talented guys on the team, and Coots had his first preseason goal yesterday. Can't remember off the top of my head. I think Drew maybe had one goal, if
Drew,
that.
yeah.
That game against the AHL Rangers team. Yeah, I think he and Jake both had a couple of assists in that game, but again, just really, I didn't see a lot of strong performances out there in the preseason games. Carter Hart obviously looked good until yesterday. So, Jamey, I mean, what were your observations from the training camp games that we saw?
Yeah, my observations were the same as yours. They averaged 2.17 goals a game for the preseason, which isn't very good. One key factor that played into that was their power play. Their power play was 3 of 22, and that's not going to get it done. And you touched on Ivan Provorov there. They are trying to make him into a player he just isn't right now, and he's just not offensive right now. And to have him on a power play unit, I think holds back a unit. I think Provorov is an excellent player, and I think he's going to rebound in a strong way. I'm not saying he can never be that guy, but for the first few months of this season, and Michael Therrien being new to the power play, I would just put another defenseman up with Sanheim on the second power play unit. Provorov, I think, is getting too much pressure, and I think it hinders the second power play unit. But I think the experiment for G being on the right side on the power play too should end. It's just you can't take a successful guy who has been a power play force throughout the majority of his career and throw him from the left to the right. It's enough shifting right now. And preseason is a time to fine tune some things. And I see Michael Therrien interchanging, and they said that they wanted to make the power play less predictable. So they were going to use, different players on the units throughout the majority of the season, shift them all over to make them less predictable. Yeah, that's great, but Giroux needs to be on the left side. That's where he has the most success in his NHL career. So that factors into the goals, scored per game too. But I do agree. I think the vets, were a letdown. Giroux finished the preseason with 4 points. Voracek finished the season with 4 points. Both of them, did I thought, did very well, except for Jake, turns the puck over a lot and whatnot. And I love Jake. He averages a point per game, just about anyway. So I mean, he's great. He's a good player. But I just am a little lackadaisical with those turnovers, and I'm sure AV is not very happy about that either. And you also mentioned Travis Konechny. I thought put forth a good campaign, but let's understand some things here. Michael Raffle to me was a letdown this preseason. Scott Lawton to me didn't do very much this preseason. Like you said, I mean, these players are too talented not to put the puck in the back of the net or push the play. You have a lot of young guys pushing the play there. Farabee was snake bit, throughout the whole preseason. We had Bunneman contribute, Shorinsky contribute. You had all these young guys contribute. But where were the vets? Finally, Coots, like you said yesterday, finally got his first goal in the preseason. Coots is going to be. I'm not concerned about Coots. Like I said, it's a new system. They're playing with different players, on their line. They weren't playing, he was playing with Giroux the majority of the time, but Travis Konechny was not there either because he was a holdout situation. So he missed the first few preseason games and whatnot, so that could have factored into Couturier. The one very good thing that I saw throughout the preseason was their penalty kill. Their penalty kill finished at 94.4%. Talk about a penalty kill that has been hard for the past 4 seasons at least. They've been bottom feeders in the NHL, and for Mike Yeo to just come in here and change this, with players who he didn't even know who was going to make the roster and whatnot, and make them all successful. That's a pretty darn good job there with how many young players the Flyers actually kept until the very end of the preseason.
Okay, so I'll be honest. I'm observing the preseason. I would say from what I've heard from Jamey, I'm observing it in a different sense personally. And I know a lot of people like to look at the stats and all that preseason. Over the years, I learned that they're almost completely irrelevant. Like for instance, Carson Twarynski putting up these goals, it's fantastic, and I do see him as a really good player. And maybe he's better than most of us anticipate, which would be awesome. But I always saw him as an NHL player, so during the season, it's going to be harder for him to score. We saw that with somebody like Vorobiev last year, who was a point per game essentially during the preseason, lighting it up every night, and then didn't translate at all. That happens pretty often with preseason. It does, where a lot of these players will do well and it'll kind of balance out. The thing that I looked for that I thought we did well, far fewer breakdowns as a team. Look at the way the team played last year in comparison to the way they played this year. There were 2-on-1s almost every shift, and I'm not even exaggerating. They could not play defense to save their lives. I would say already right off the bat, this team plays a better defensive game. So far, we have not produced offense, just like you said, Kevin. That most likely is translated by learning this new system without executing on a precise and consistent basis. It's difficult to score. We've seen that. And while they played well at times, they haven't put it all together. And I do agree with you. I do think that there's some harsh criticisms on the vets. I actually kind of exclude Giroux a little bit. I haven't really seen a lack of effort on his part. Some rust, yes, for sure. And same with Couturier. Actually, a lot of rust for Couturier, and some for G. But I would say overall, the veterans, what I saw last game, in my mind, that first period was completely unacceptable. It's acceptable to lose to them. I have no problem losing. That happens. I've seen great teams lose, even though they outperform the team. Happens all the time. And you can say even the Flyers outperformed them. In the beginning of that game, they looked like they were a CHL team. I don't even know. And even then, I would say no, because there was no hustle. If they did not come in like they wanted to win that game, and I would say what concerns me overall is the same thing that concerned me last season and what we see. It's obviously not a talent issue. You can see even with all the talent, they still couldn't beat a worse team. If you do not come out like a team, I don't know what it is they're doing to prepare the games, but they need to change it. They brought in new veterans, but they cannot start this way. They cannot take any nights off, even against bad teams. They embarrassed the Flyers, quite frankly, and themselves the other night. And they made up for it. Yeah, they played well. They are a good team, but they obviously were not together and not united enough. Not enough. They're not paying attention to the details enough where the kids have to come out and be your energy. And I get it, it's a preseason game, but this team has a lot to prove, and these guys have a lot to prove. And I don't know. I'm usually a pretty positive guy, but it's more of an attitude problem, in my opinion, at least at this point. And I don't necessarily pick on one player. I don't think that there's somebody who's toxic, but I'm not seeing a united team. I'm not. Maybe now it'll happen, right? I think that maybe it was embarrassing enough to lose that game that maybe they'll kind of look at each other in the mirror and be like, okay, we're not going to do this again. Like we got to start taking care of the little things. We got to start spending more time as a team, figuring out whatever they need to do to get up for games. Because I just found it unacceptable. A lot of great stuff this preseason, and I do think the offense will come. I think Vigneault is an offensive coach, and I think we've seen hints of it. It's really just a lot of sloppy play more than ever, but it's really just commitment to coming out of the gate and wanting to win, believing that you are the better team and that you have a chance to win the Stanley Cup. And that attitude I saw the other night was not that.
I was really surprised. I mean, after how terrible they played for the overwhelming majority of last season, for them to come out, in that game yesterday on the global stage and
Yeah.
to just look terrible and to watch the same defensive miscues that we saw for most of last season, especially the first half of last season. It was really surprising. So we'll see how things shake out. You made a good point about Twarynski and some of these guys being able to chip in the preseason, because a lot of games you're not playing against the full roster on the other side, so guys are able to do things that they're not going to be able to do in the regular season. So it'll be interesting to see how that whole thing shakes out. We talked a little bit about them being jammed up against the cap. I agree. Jamey said something about Michael Raffle, and I got crap because I said heading into the end of the season, there was no reason for them to to bring Raffle back. As just let him walk. And Turinsky was one of the guys I said, hey, go with a fourth line. Turinsky, Lawton, Obi Kubil, or Hartman, because Hartman, we kind of all were thinking at the time Hartman would probably still be around. That would be a solid, fourth line. His production has declined so much. His skating, has declined, not as much as his production has. And paying him $1.6 million when he's going to be 32 years old, it's just 2 years here. It's crazy. There's just no reason for it. There are plenty of young guys who you can have out there for 7, 8, 900K who are younger, faster, have more energy. And when you're that tight against the cap, it just didn't make sense. And there was a couple of other things that I've been critical about over the course of the summer. Why Chuck Fletcher agreed to eat $1 million of Gudis' salary is just mind-boggling. There was no reason for that whatsoever. And you bring in Niskanen at 5.85 or 875, whatever his number is, and then you tack on another million on top of that. I think that was just crazy. And one of the things that I'd said, was I wouldn't have gone and traded for Braun. I don't think they needed Braun. I thought they could have gone with Myers and Haig as the third pair, Morin as the seventh defenseman, and that would have given them more money if they wanted to go get, if they, and a lot of people, I've had battles on Twitter with, people about physical, and, people say, oh, we need somebody like Stewart because he can play physical. Well, go get Michael Furland. If you want a physical player, then get somebody who can actually still play hockey and be physical. And there were other guys that they could have gotten for what they ended up paying Braun or less. They could have had, there's a handful of guys that they could have added that would have increased the effectiveness of the top 9 forward units. I think that would have been a little bit more important than bringing in that one other defenseman. Yeah, it's great to have, potentially 3-3 right hand, left hand, even though Myers isn't going to be up right now. But so there's, $3.8 million for Braun. Now, whether, if they'd signed another forward, then that could have been a wash. But, the $1 million on Gudis, the $1.6 million on Raffle, that makes a difference, right? And then you now all of a sudden you're not jammed up against the cap. What are your thoughts, Yariv?
I think that there's room to criticize there to a degree, but I don't think that these cap situations are that big of a deal. I think maybe for the beginning of the year, I do like the Niskanen trade. We took on salary because we didn't have to trade any assets. I don't think we would have got Matt Niskanen for Gudis straight up. I think we're only scratching the surface of what Niskanen can bring, and I'm personally excited about him. So I like that trade. The Braun trade, I think we overpaid for him. Was he a complete necessity? I don't know. But I will say what I've seen, at least in his one-on-one compete, it's definitely a level above what Robert Haig and Sam Morin bring at this point. I don't know. We probably overpaid for him, but he has a really strong stick. I'm not sure where we are right now as a team, but I do know this is the deepest team the Flyers have had in a very long time. And it shows in the cap numbers too, right? We're actually finally getting against the cap. And for a reason, we have a very deep team, a talented team, but again, we have to produce that into the way we play as a unit. I've heard people say the Flyers aren't fast. We don't have any fast skaters. I think that's completely untrue. I think it only looks that way because they play like a mess. Again, I'll use the last game as an example. If you just watch the beginning of that game, that is the way the Flyers play when they're at their worst. You will see a humongous stretch from the defense to the forwards. They will consistently cheat and try to make these ridiculous passes that have very low chance of going anywhere. And you look at the way we were beat. The team that played us just played 5 men in tight defensively, move as a unit. And literally that's all we have to do. So like this cap stuff is created, but it shouldn't stop us from being competitive, right? Like the stuff that we're talking about, like bringing in Braun, that he's not the end all be all, right? Our defense runs off of Provorov, off of Gostisbehere. We need to play as a unit. So I'm annoyed at some of the cap problems because it's created things like Myers and Farabee in the minors. Having said that, I'd rather have more good players than less, and I suspect we're going to lose people to injuries as the season goes on. So I'm okay with it, but yeah, I think there's room for some criticism there. I don't think you're completely. I think you make a lot of good points with, you can choose to be a little more conservative rather than kind of just ratchet it up and get all the way to the line right off the beginning of the season. Theoretically, somebody like Braun could have been had, a little bit later in the season. Maybe we could have got him, in November or December, right? We didn't have to get him in the off season, so stuff like that.
They ended up paying for a second and a third for Braun, which is exactly what it cost to get Gusev out of Vegas. I mean, that would have been a much better return if you ask me. And that, because one of the things that Isaiah from O&B podcast has been saying a lot is he just doesn't believe that this core is going to be able to get it done. He thinks that there's another move that they're going to have to make that could potentially contribute to kind of seeing the same slow starts, the same potential lack of offense, sloppy play. So it'll be interesting to see how the season starts off. It's going to be a little bit more difficult to gauge because of the changes in the coaching staff and the systems and everything. But Jamey, what do you think as far as the cap? And do you think that they should have looked at moving somebody like a Jake or somebody and kind of changing a big piece out of the core to shake things up a little more?
If the first 25 games is going to be very telling for the Flyers. If they are under 500 going into the month of November, and things continue to spiral. Sorry about that. Out of control. Mark my words, a move will be made. And a core person will move. It's just hands down. AV already called out the vets. After yesterday. Saying that, he wants more from his vets. Pretty much in a nutshell, the young guys have given their all. Justin Braun, I hear you guys talking a lot about Justin Braun. Braun, ironically enough, has been one of our most consistent defensemen throughout the preseason. Justin Braun stands people up at the blue line. He has a great stick, a great reach. He knows where to be and when. When was the last time that we've seen opponents get stood up at the blue line? Justin Braun provides that. So I'm actually okay with that. He actually surprised me throughout the preseason. Matt Niskanen, I also like. He was brought in, and Yariv can touch on this because we were both in the locker room at times last year. The locker room last year was toxic. It was very quiet at times, too quiet, almost too quiet, where you could hear a pin drop, and that's not good. You want your locker room, you want your players, even when they're losing, to continue to talk because you got to move forward. And it may be a back-to-back situation where you got to throw this game out the window and play the next day, and you only get 10 hours off or something of that nature. It was almost too quiet. That is the reason why Matt Niskanen was brought in alone, was to help aid this locker room and make it a locker room of success, to make people feel good again, to make the players feel good again. And that's what Matt Niskanen brings. He's a leader. He was a leader in Washington. There's a reason why Niskanen and Braun received many, many tweets from many players throughout their team. Oh, we're going to miss you. We're going to miss you. So that's the reason why they were brought in, and they have solidified, to me, our decor. I'm not too concerned about our decor. I know there is, of course, a logjam, and I think there is one more move. I think that the Flyers could make a move this week or next week to clear some of the cap space. And, Robert Hagg, I know we touched on it in the beginning of the shows, and, an ideal piece to move to help aid the cap. The Flyers are going to have to make some moves here because when Nolan Patrick comes, when the Flyers place Nolan Patrick on LTIR, they got 10 games, 10 NHL games, and then he could be put back into play. When he comes back, they're going to have another cap challenge there that they have to get over. There's going to be multiple cap challenges, but the key is, to me, is fast starts, like your Reef touched on. We saw a lot of ugly things that we saw from the past few years. Slow starts. They were terrible in the first period, absolutely outplayed, and it was downright unacceptable. Now, the difference from yesterday's game to last year is what happened after the game. AV said it's flat out unacceptable. Unacceptable. And he didn't specifically call out, which vets, but I'm pretty sure we know which vets he was talking about. And I'm willing to talk about that. Jake Voracek, for one. His last daisical turnovers, he had like 3 of them in the first period. It takes away all the good he does, because more often than not, when Jake makes a turnover, 9 times out of 10, that puck ends up in the back of the net for whatever reason. He's got very bad luck with his turnovers. That is an area of concern for me, and it appears that it's probably an area of concern for AV as well. He didn't specifically call him out on it, but I guarantee that he was one of those that he was mentioning in Jake Field's Heat today. create less turnovers. Transition well out of the zone. You can't transition well out of the zone if you're going to turn the puck over. It's simple mistakes. Fortunately, I will say we're 0-0 headed into Friday, headed into
Yep.
Friday's game. And so what we do yesterday was a dang good thing that it happened yesterday and not Friday, because now they can learn from it. They take it. All these young players look, they learn, and like, okay, this is what I got to do better. The vets, if our vets, when I was there the first day of training camp, it was a great locker room, fantastic locker room. People were talking. Jake was giddy. Everybody was feel good. If yesterday's game does anything, it makes them want to come out and make a statement on Friday against the Chicago Blackhawks in Prague.
So speaking of, the season opens up Friday against the Blackhawks. The Blackhawks have a really good mix of young guys, solid vets. They still have Keith and Seabrook on D. Obviously Kane and Taves, and have Alex Nylander. Dylan Strome is going to have his first full season as a Blackhawk. When he came over, he was almost a point per game guy. He was playing on that line with DeBrincat. DeBrincat had a monster season last year. He'll probably get 40 goals again this year. So that could potentially be a bad matchup for the Flyers if they come out slow again in the first period. Yariv, how do you see what the Flyers need to do on Friday to avoid some of these mistakes and to hopefully get the season started off with a victory?
To Jamey's point, and this is the same point that I was going to make as well, is that you want, at least that this stuff happens, you want the team to go through diversity or adversity. This is definitely adversity as far as looking at yourself in the mirror and being like, hey, if we don't come out there and compete, we can lose to non-NHL teams. Just to know how low that they can drop is maybe a good reminder. I think they really need to buy into what AV is selling. And I mean that 100%. He is a confident coach. He has a very particular system that he wants them to play. I don't think anybody's rejecting it. I think it just takes time. But they need to fully commit to this system and just really get up for games. Like, commit to this season fully. Like, whatever it is that's going on in their lives. I know Giroux just had a baby and whatnot. This stuff is going to distract them. Every team deals with this stuff, so it shouldn't be an excuse for anybody, unfortunately, even if it is realistically an excuse. So they just really need to get together and operate as a team. They're already talented enough to succeed, at least compete at a high level. There's no excuse for not doing that at this point. They need to buy in. They need to play a confident game, and they need to play their game. And guys like Gostisbehere needs to be empowered to play his game. He's not a shutdown defenseman. He's the type of guy who will look for mistakes, turn them into offense. Again, he's a high impact offensive defenseman. Most of them struggle defensively majority of their career in the NHL until the second half. They start to finally get it. I think we're probably going to see that with Ghost pretty soon, if not already. I do think he's looked pretty good. But overall, I really do believe they just need to play together as a unit, and they need to buy in. There's enough young talent coming, and it's going to come throughout the year. Frost will be on this team. Farabee will be on this team. It's not they can't really hold back that much longer. It's an issue of talent as well. So once people start playing as a unit, so we have Scott Gordon down there to kind of help support that. We know Gordon's a good coach. It shouldn't really be questioned at this point. So they really need to just buy in. If they need cap space, getting rid of somebody like Mike Garoppolo isn't that hard. Like you said, right? Like maybe they shouldn't have signed him, but 1.6 million, you can move him if you need to. If you need to bring up these kids, but they need to buy in. They need to start playing confident. And against a team like Chicago, they're going to bring the exact same type of game right back at the Flyers. So it should be a really interesting game, but they have to remain confident, take those chances, and not have those breakdowns. No more 2-on-1s every break. We cannot play that way. As long as we can be less interesting, at least goal scoring wise, but we can't play full of mistakes. And that's what I would look for, is to play at least a competitive game in the sense that not make mistakes, don't have the lapses, and at least put in 45 minutes, 50 minutes of the 60, not 20 or 30.
Definitely. I'm hoping, and I've been anticipating that Ghost is going to have a good bounce back season. I mean, he said that the injuries really hampered his skating. He certainly looks like he's skating better. He still has a hard time getting the puck on net with some of his monster slap shots from the blue line, but he should be able to get back to being a 50-point, 60-point defenseman potentially. If he can do that, the D overall avoids turning the puck over. They get the puck out of their end, get the move up ice, get that transition going. Hopefully they'll be able to get some pressure going, keep Chicago to the outside a little bit. Obviously, the PK, has looked strong, as Jamey said earlier. There's really no reason why it was as terrible as it had been the last 4 or 5 years. There was just no reason for that to happen. They got to get the power play going, though. That's struggled the last several years as well. They've got to convert. Because the good teams, the teams that are going to be able to make a deep run, they convert. They've got top 10, top 15 at least special teams, on both ends. Like you said and Jamey said, they've got to come out of the gate, play hard. They can't fumble around and sleep through the first 10 minutes of the game, or they're going to end up chasing it. Jamey, what do you think?
Well, to touch on Ghost, because I heard you mention Ghost, I think he has 19 Ghost bombs this year, and he'll and also have 41 apples. I think he hits 60 points this year again. I do. The guy looks rejuvenated. I thought he had a decent preseason. I think everybody, towards the tail end of the preseason, some players got stronger, some players got. I wouldn't necessarily say he had his best games, but paired with Justin Braun, both of them played very, very well together. That's a pairing I think that sticks for sure. On opening night on Friday against the Chicago Blackhawks. The Flyers have to get out of the month of October. It is a brutal schedule. It is brutal, brutal, brutal. They go from Prague, then they go out to in the west, in the Western Canadian trip there. It's going to be very, very tough and grueling, and they're going to lose a lot of sleep and whatnot. I want to see the Flyers at 500 by the time the end of October hits, and I think if they're at 500, that is 100% success. It is a brutal schedule opening in Prague. Then they got one home game, so 5 days without even having their home opener yet. And then they play Wednesday, and then they go out, on a Western Canadian. It is a brutal early schedule, so I want to see the Flyers at 500. I think the difference this year from last year that you're going to see is better goaltending. Carter Hart, let's not forget, starter Hart we got for the whole season this year. Reliable phenom in Carter Hart. I think he's going to stand on his head, and I think that his save percentage will be .919, .920. I think he's going to put together a really solid campaign. We look at yesterday. I throw that game out the window for Carter Hart yesterday. He's playing on an Olympic-sized rink and not an NHL-sized rink. NHL-sized rink is Friday in Prague, fortunately. I heard a lot of his angles and whatnot. I just think the goaltending is going to be far better. Not only with Carter Hart, but he has a solid backup in, Brian Elliott. If Brian Elliott can stay healthy and appear in 30 to 35 contests, for the Flyers, I think that's a successful season on the goaltending, aspect there. And now if Brian Elliott plays more than 35 games, then I'm sitting here scratching my head. I don't want to see Carter Hart play 50, but, a solid 35 games from a Brian Elliott and 47 for Carter Hart, I think is pretty solid balance, of using both your netminders. I think that this team has heart, and that is another difference that I saw, during the preseason. And I know that they didn't get the results. I get it. And overall, this team has a lot of heart. They actually care. I'm sure, with the news of Farabee getting sent down at Myers, I mean, I'm sure they're, torn, and I'm sure some of the players are as well. There's a care aspect. You see a leader in Sean Couturier talk about how good Joel Farabee was. You see, Giroux, people want to knock his leadership and whatnot, and they want to talk. He wants to talk freely about a Farabee, and same thing with Voracek. The heart is there. This team is going to be far better, and I think they contend for third in division this year. AV has shown a lot of tools that I like, the things that he says, calling out the team when they need to be called out, calling out the vets, when they need to be called out. That goes a long way towards respect for him. And I think that these players are going to respect him, whereas last year I think that some of the players lost respect for Dave Hackstall. It's a respect factor. These guys look up to AV. And, I mean, he has the best quote, be an effing flyer. That to me right there showed that the name on the front. I'll take a quote out of Herb Brooks's book. The logo on the front is more important than the name on the back. And I think that that is the difference in the culture change that this team has gone through in the preseason. And that's why I think yesterday's game was good that they got shellacked.
Good first show kicking off the season. It's great to have you guys back on. I think it's going to be fun. I've been excited this summer. Some of the young guys, like I said, been things that I've been kind of most excited about. So hopefully, these guys won't be spending too much time down in the AHL system, and I don't think they will. So I'm looking forward to the season kicking off on Friday. Hopefully, when they get back, they'll go out, have a strong trip out west, and we'll see how things shake out. Just going around the horn real quick, guys. Anything else you want to touch on before we go?
I think they finished with 99 points and finished good for third in the division.
I will say this is I know a lot of people are reacting to the line changes. I would say expect more of them, and I would expect it to intensify at least in the early portion of the season combinations that we hopefully haven't even thought of, and that means that AV is really working to find chemistry. So that would actually be a good thing. So don't assume that all line changes are a bad thing.
All right, guys. Thanks again for joining me on the this season's inaugural show. Flyers fans, we got a game on Friday to look forward to. Hopefully, it's going to be an exciting season, and it's always going to be exciting to watch the Phantoms too. They've got a stacked, young, exciting team down there. So I, for one, am going to be getting the AHL TV package again this year, and watching the kids play. So I'm looking forward to that. All right, Flyers fans, that's going to do it for tonight. Thanks for listening in, and we will talk back soon. Good night.